Oklahoma is under intense scrutiny for what is being called a botched execution this week at the state penitentiary in McAllister. It's raised questions about Oklahoma's drug protocol and procedures for conducting executions by lethal injection and prompted renewed debate about the death penalty here and around the world. The inmate had been convicted of murder for shooting 19-year-old Stephanie Neiman of Perry and ordering his accomplices to bury her alive. ONR reporter-producer Liz Exon was one of the witnesses to the execution.
The execution of Clayton Darrell Lockett was scheduled for 6 p.m. Tuesday, April 29th at the Oklahoma State Prison in McAllister. He was the first of two inmates scheduled to die in the death chamber that evening, the state's first double execution since 1937.
Test, Mom.
In the prison visitor center, reporters gathered to find out who would be selected as official witnesses. 12 journalists were picked. They expected to return to the visitor center before 6:30 because previous executions have lasted no longer than 12 minutes. Those remaining in the visitor center, including DOC Public Information Officer Jerry Massey, waited for the phone call advising that the execution was complete. But the clock kept ticking, and the call never came. The reporters returned to the visitor center with startling news.
Is Lockett dead, or
we don't know his status right now?
We don't know the status.
Those of us who witnessed the event were shaken and reported what we observed. 13 minutes after the first injection to render him unconscious, Lockett began writhing on the gurney.
At 6:37, he says, "Something's wrong." At 6:39, he's still lifting his shoulders and head off the gurney, grimacing, and appeared to be in distress. At 6:37:59, he is still grimacing, lifting his head and shoulders off the gurney. At that point, he says something like, "Man." He is grimacing and seemed to be in distress and fighting what he's feeling.
At 6:39, the blind to the execution chamber was lowered and the sound from the room was shut off. 17 minutes later, Corrections Director Robert Patton returned to make a stunning announcement.
There was a vein failure and the chemicals did not make it in the offender.
He's still alive at this point.
And under the director's authority, he has issued a stay for the second execution.
Lockett's two lawyers were visibly upset.
They said this was a botched execution, so that the state was bound and determined that they don't know the status of Lockett at this point, but they think that he should be taken to the hospital and try to bring him back to life. And there is a potential lawsuit, and that it was extremely difficult for them to watch.
But Lockett did not come back to life. He died at 7:06, 43 minutes after the execution began.
As those that were inside witnessed, it was determined that he was sedated at approximately 7 minutes into the execution. At that time, we began pushing the second and third drugs in the protocol. There was some concern at that time that the drugs were not having the effect, so the doctor observed the line and determined that the line had blown. After conferring with the warden, and unknown how much drugs had went into him, it was my decision at that time to stop the execution. I notified the Attorney General's office, the Governor's office, of my intent to stop the execution and requested a stay for 14 days for the second execution scheduled this afternoon. At approximately 7:06 hours, inmate suffered what appears to be a massive heart attack and passed away.
Patton told reporters he wouldn't take questions, but was pressed to define what he meant by the line had blown.
What does line has blown mean?
Yes.
The vein blew.
The vein blew.
The vein.
Yes.
Lockett's vein.
Yes.
Blew. What does that mean?
It means the vein exploded.
His vein exploded.
Yes.
The reaction to the botched execution was swift and strong.
I can't imagine a bigger debacle for the state of Oklahoma. Nationally and internationally, we're on the stage right now, and the world is looking to us. The eyes of the world are on us as to how we're going to resolve the issues that are here before us today.
Senator Constance Johnson and Representative Seneca Scott announced they would call for a vote in both houses on a resolution to place a moratorium on all executions until a full independent investigation of the botched execution is completed. Governor Mary Fallin addressed reporters but did not allow questions.
Last night, the state of Oklahoma executed Clayton Lockett. In 1999, Clayton Lockett physically assaulted, kidnapped, and shot Stephanie Newman, and then had an accomplice bury her alive in a shallow grave. He appealed the execution, and that appeal was rejected by both the Oklahoma Supreme Court and the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. He had his day in court. I believe the legal process worked. I believe the death penalty is an appropriate response and punishment to those who commit heinous crimes against their fellow men and women. However, I also believe the state needs to be certain of its protocols and its procedures for executions and that they work. For that reason, I've asked last night for a review of the Department of Corrections execution protocols. After consulting further with the Department of Corrections Director, Robert Patton, we agree that an independent review of the Department of Corrections procedures would be effective and also appropriate. Therefore, I've also asked the Department of Public Safety and our Commissioner, Michael Thompson, to lead an independent review of the state's execution procedures.
An autopsy will be performed by an independent pathologist, but there are questions about the independence of the investigation.
The mere fact that the Commissioner for Public Safety is on the governor's cabinet, I think he is eligible for pressure to rule a certain way or to make certain findings. And at this point, we're really looking for truth. We're really looking for justice.
Brady Henderson is the legal director for Oklahoma's American Civil Liberties Union.
There needs to be an independent investigation, as Senator Johnson said, that goes outside the state of Oklahoma. What the past few weeks have shown us is that many state actors here and state agencies, people in the executive, are willing to put politics above life and put politics above humanity. And that means what we need is an organization that's truly independent. Now, that might be the federal government. And one of the first places to look could be the U.S. Justice Department coming in here. That would be a step in the right direction. But the point is, we can't have, as the proverbial metaphor says, the wolves guarding the hen house.
Liz Exon joins us for more on the events surrounding the execution. Liz, Director of Corrections Robert Patton released a detailed timeline of that day. What happened after the blind was closed?
Dick, approximately 10 minutes later, a phone in the viewing room rang and Director Patton leaves to take that call, stretching the phone cord out into the hall. We now know he was on the phone with the warden who was in the death chamber. Director Patton has provided an affidavit on what occurred. After the blind was closed, the attending doctor checked the inmate's IV, which, as it turns out, was just a single line into his groin instead of 2 IV lines, 1 in each arm. The doctor observed the blood vein had collapsed and the drugs had either absorbed into the tissue, leaked out, or both. By phone, the director asked, "Have enough drugs been administered to cause death?" And the doctor responded, "No." Then the director asked, "Is there another vein available? And if so, are there enough drugs remaining?" And the doctor answered no to both questions. Then the director calls off the execution under the authority granted by the governor.
So are there questions being raised about whether this was an execution?
Many questions, not only reporters, but legal experts as well. Since the execution was halted and he died 10 minutes later, does that mean the state of Oklahoma just killed him? The definition of manslaughter in the state is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. Whether it was unlawful or not, I don't know.
Liz Exon, it has been quite a week. Thank you.